Emma had always dreamed of escaping the busy city life, but she never imagined it would take her this far. After a painful breakup with someone she thought she would marry, she felt the need to leave everything behind and start fresh. She found herself in a small, quiet town out in the middle of nowhere, far from the noise and chaos she had left behind. The town, with its dusty roads and wide, open skies, was a place that seemed frozen in time. It wasn't what Emma expected, but it was exactly what she needed. The small inn she booked was tucked away at the edge of town, just a simple wooden building with an old porch and a few rocking chairs. It didn't have the luxury of a big city hotel, but there was something comforting about the simplicity of it. When Emma stepped out of the car, she could smell the fresh country air, a sharp contrast to the pollution she'd grown used to back home. She didn't know how long she would stay here, but she didn't mind. The only thing she wanted was peace, a break from everything that had been weighing her down. The innkeeper, an elderly woman named Mrs. Wells, welcomed Emma with a warm smile and showed her to her room. The place was quiet, and Emma liked it that way. She wanted to stay under the radar and not draw attention to herself. As Mrs. Wells handed her the key, she mentioned the local attractions, horseback riding, hiking, and a few other things to do around town, but Emma wasn't interested. She just needed some time to think and heal, away from the reminders of her past life. Emma unpacked her bags slowly, taking her time with each item. She felt like a stranger in this town, but she liked it that way. She didn't want anyone to know who she was or where she came from. In her mind, the past was better left behind. After a few minutes, she walked over to the small window in her room and gazed out at the vast landscape. The mountains in the distance were beautiful, their tops still dusted with the remnants of snow. For the first time in weeks, she felt like she could breathe again. That's when she heard the sound of hooves against the dirt road outside. Emma turned, peeking through the window to see a man riding a horse, his silhouette framed against the setting sun. He was tall, wearing a wide-brimmed hat, and his face was mostly hidden in shadow. But there was something about him that caught her attention. She watched as he rode past the inn, the horse's hooves clopping softly against the ground. He didn't look like the kind of person she would ever meet in a big city. There was an air of ruggedness to him, like he belonged to the land and didn't care for anything else. Emma couldn't explain it, but she felt a strange pull toward him, as if he was someone she needed to meet, though she immediately dismissed the thought. What would a cowboy want with someone like her? Later that evening, after Emma had settled in for the night, she decided to grab a quick dinner at the small restaurant in the town square. The place was cozy, with wooden tables and dim lights hanging from the ceiling. As she walked in, the smell of fried food and fresh bread filled the air. The few people inside glanced up as she entered, but it wasn't long before they returned to their conversations. Everyone seemed to mind their own business, which was exactly what she wanted. She sat at a table near the window and ordered a simple meal. As she waited, she could hear the chatter around her. The locals were friendly, but didn't seem particularly interested in talking to a newcomer like Emma. She was grateful for that. But then, a voice interrupted her thoughts. "Well, look who's here. The city girl." Emma looked up, surprised to hear the familiar voice. It was him, the cowboy from earlier. He was standing near the door, holding a drink in one hand and a hat in the other. He had a playful smile on his face as he looked at her, as if he had known her for years. Emma stiffened. "I'm not a city girl," she said, trying to keep her voice neutral. "I'm just here for a little break, too." The cowboy chuckled, as if he didn't believe her. "Sure you are. What brings someone like you to a quiet little place like this?" "What?" Emma didn't want to explain. She didn't want to tell him about her broken heart, about how she had left everything behind in the city, or about the failed relationship that had led her here. She simply shrugged, hoping he would lose interest. "I'm just passing through," she said, trying to sound casual. "Passing through, huh?" he said, still smiling. I don't think I've seen someone like you around here before. Most people come for the peace and quiet, but you've got that city look in your eyes. What happened? Break up with your boyfriend? Emma's heart skipped a beat. How did he know? Excuse me, she said sharply, standing up from the table. She wasn't in the mood to discuss her personal life with a complete stranger. But the cowboy wasn't done. Hey, I didn't mean to offend you. I was just curious. It's not every day someone from the city rolls into town. He wasn't backing off, and Emma knew he wasn't going to let her leave without some sort of response. She paused, trying to find the right words. I don't want to talk about it, she said firmly. I'm just here to be alone. For a moment, the cowboy seemed taken aback. Then, his expression softened. Fair enough. But if you ever need someone to talk to, I'm around. He flashed her a grin before turning and heading toward the bar. Emma sat back down, shaking her head. Who did he think he was? She didn't need his pity or his attention. She had enough to deal with on her own. But even as she tried to shake off the encounter, she couldn't help but wonder about him. There was something about the way he spoke, the way he didn't push her too hard but still showed an interest. She knew she shouldn't let it bother her, but it did. Later that evening, as Emma walked back to her room, she heard the sound of hooves again. Looking outside, she saw the cowboy riding by once more. This time, he glanced up at her window and waved. Emma quickly pulled the curtains shut, but the image of him stayed with her. She told herself it didn't matter. She was here to heal, not to get involved with anyone. But deep down, she couldn't help but wonder. What if this cowboy wasn't like the others? What if there was something about him that was different? For now, though, she pushed the thought aside. It was too soon to think about anything other than getting some rest and figuring out what to do next. But one thing was clear. This cowboy was going to be hard to ignore. The next few days passed slowly for Emma. She kept to herself, spending time in her room at the inn or wandering around town, avoiding the few people who would try to make small talk. There was a sense of peace here that she hadn't realized she was missing in her life. The gentle pace of the small town allowed her to clear her mind, even if the thoughts of her past kept creeping in at times. She hadn't felt this much at ease in a long time. On the fourth day of her stay, Emma decided to take a walk through the nearby trails. The sun was shining brightly, and the fresh mountain air felt revitalizing. She'd heard from Mrs. Wells that the trails were beautiful, and she figured it would be the perfect opportunity to clear her head and enjoy some solitude. She laced up her sneakers, grabbed a light jacket, and headed out. The path was well marked, with tall trees lining both sides and the occasional wildflower growing along the edge. It was the perfect setting for some quiet reflection. Emma felt free as she walked. The soft crunch of the gravel under her feet, the only sound she could hear, apart from the occasional bird call. She could feel her tension slowly melting away with each step she took. But the peaceful moment was short-lived. As she reached a narrow part of the trail that curved around a steep hill, she noticed something strange. The ground beneath her feet seemed to shift, and before she could even take another step, her ankle twisted painfully. She let out a gasp, stumbling forward, and managed to catch herself against a nearby tree. But the pain in her foot was sharp and immediate. Emma winced, holding onto the tree trunk to steady herself. She looked down, seeing that her ankle was swollen and already beginning to bruise. Great, she muttered to herself, feeling frustrated. Of all the things to happen in the middle of nowhere, a twisted ankle was the last thing she needed. The trail was quiet, and there was no one in sight. She tried to take a step but instantly felt the sharp pain again. There was no way she was going to be able to walk back to the inn on her own. She had to do something. Trying not to panic, Emma sat down on the ground, propping her injured foot up on a rock. She looked around, hoping for someone to pass by. But the trail was still empty, and she realized how isolated she really was. Her phone had no signal out here, and she hadn't seen any other hikers on the trail that day. She let out a deep sigh. It seemed like she was on her own. After a few minutes of sitting there, she tried to stand up again, determined not to let the situation get the best of her. The pain was still there, but she was stubborn. She could limp back to the inn. She just had to get moving. That was when she heard the sound of hooves in the distance. At first, Emma wasn't sure if she was imagining it. But then, the sound grew louder, and she turned her head to see a figure on horseback rounding the bend of the trail. The cowboy. Of course, it had to be him. She couldn't believe it. Out of all the people who could have been nearby, it was the one man she had tried so hard to avoid. Jack rode up slowly, his horse's hooves kicking up dust as he came into view. He saw her sitting on the ground, looking pained, and immediately slowed down. "Hey there, what's wrong?" he asked, dismounting with ease. Emma was about to brush him off, but the pain in her ankle made it impossible to pretend everything was fine. She reluctantly looked up at him. "I twisted my ankle," she said, trying to keep her tone neutral. "I'm fine. Just a little sore. I'll figure it out. Just a new." Jack raised an eyebrow. He didn't look convinced. "You don't look fine to me," he said, his voice gentle but firm. "Where do you need to go? I can help you." Emma shook her head, not wanting to admit that she was stuck. "I'll be okay. I just need to rest for a bit." Jack knelt down in front of her, giving her a careful look. He knew she wasn't telling the full truth, but he didn't press. "Look, I've got my truck parked just up the road. I can give you a ride back to the inn if you want." Emma felt a moment of hesitation. The last thing she wanted was to accept help from him, but she knew she couldn't make it back on her own. "I don't want to be a burden," she said, her voice soft. "You're not a burden," Jack said with a reassuring smile. "I don't mind. Besides, it's the least I can do after making you walk all the way out here in the first place." Emma blinked, surprised at his words. She hadn't realized he'd been watching her that closely. "I didn't ask for a ride," she said, her tone more defensive than she meant it to be. Jack chuckled, clearly not fazed by her attitude. "You didn't ask, but you sure need one. Come on, let me help you." Emma sighed but finally gave in, nodding her head. "Fine, but just this once." Jack gave a mock salute and carefully helped her to her feet. "I promise, this is a one-time thing." As they slowly made their way toward his truck, Jack asked her if she was okay, making small talk to ease the tension. Emma, though still irritated by her situation, found herself answering him in a way she hadn't expected. There was something about his easygoing manner that made her feel strangely comfortable, despite her initial reluctance. Once they reached his truck, Jack helped her into the passenger seat before climbing into the driver's side. Emma couldn't deny that the truck was comfortable, and the warmth inside made her feel a little less miserable. She looked out the window, watching the landscape roll by as Jack drove them back toward the inn. The ride was quiet at first, but Jack eventually broke the silence. "You're a long way from home," he said, glancing over at her. "What brings you out here, to the middle of nowhere?" Emma shifted uncomfortably in her seat. She didn't want to talk about it. She didn't want to share the reasons she had left the city, the heartache she had carried with her. But she felt Jack's eyes on her, waiting for an answer. She let out a deep breath, knowing he wasn't going to let up. "I needed a break," she said softly, her voice almost a whisper. "I had a lot going on, and I just needed some space, away from everything." Jack nodded, as though he understood. "I get that," he said simply. "Sometimes the best thing you can do is get away from everything and just breathe." They continued driving in silence, but it wasn't uncomfortable. For the first time in days, Emma found herself at ease. She still didn't know Jack well, but there was something genuine about him. It wasn't the fake politeness she had seen in so many people. There was honesty in his words, and that made her feel strangely at peace. As they pulled up to the inn, Jack stopped the truck and looked over at her. "Take care of that ankle. All right?" he said with a smile. "And if you need anything, don't hesitate to ask." Emma nodded, feeling a warmth in her chest that she wasn't sure how to handle. With that, Jack drove off, leaving Emma standing outside the inn, her heart a little lighter than it had been before. She still wasn't sure what to think of him, but she couldn't deny that he had a way of making her feel less alone. As she hobbled back inside, she couldn't help but wonder what would happen next. The days after her twisted ankle were a blur of rest and recovery. Emma had stayed in her room for most of the time, only venturing out for short walks around the inn, keeping to herself. The small town had started to feel less like a strange place and more like a refuge. But she still couldn't shake the feeling of being an outsider. Though the peacefulness was a welcome change, she hadn't expected to be so affected by the quiet. Jack had continued to check in on her, more often than she'd expected. At first, it had seemed like a casual courtesy, an occasional hello when he passed by or a quick question about her ankle when they crossed paths at the inn. But over time, his visits had become more frequent. He would bring her a cup of coffee from the diner, or stop to chat about the weather, the crops, or something else related to the ranching life. They hadn't talked much about anything personal, but with each brief conversation, Emma started to realize something. Jack wasn't just being polite. There was a certain care in the way he looked at her, in the way he made sure she was okay without pushing her too much. One afternoon, a week after her injury, Emma decided to visit the small creek that ran near the inn. The weather was warm, and the soft breeze was refreshing. She needed to get out of her room for a while. The sound of the water flowing gently through the rocks seemed to calm her racing thoughts. Emma sat on a large rock at the edge of the creek, dipping her feet into the cool water and letting the quiet of the surroundings soothe her mind. She was so lost in thought that she didn't notice Jack approaching until he was right beside her. "Mind if I sit?" Jack asked, his voice breaking the silence. Emma looked up, startled, but then saw his familiar smile. Despite her initial annoyance at how often he appeared, she found herself nodding. "Sure. Gee." Jack sat down next to her, close but not too close, his legs dangling over the edge of the rock as he looked out at the water. For a moment, neither of them spoke. The sound of the creek, along with the chirping of birds, filled the air. "Nice day, isn't it?" Jack said finally, breaking the silence. Emma nodded, dipping her feet further into the water. "Yeah, it is. I haven't really gotten to enjoy it much. Been stuck in my room most of the time." "I've noticed," Jack said with a teasing smile. "You've been hiding out. I thought maybe you'd gone into witness protection, or something." Emma laughed softly, her first real laugh in days. It felt good. "Yeah. Well, I like my privacy." Jack's smile faded a little, and for a moment, he seemed serious. "You're a long way from home. Is everything okay? You seem like you're running from something." Emma froze at his words. She hadn't realized how much of herself she had kept hidden until that moment. There was truth in his observation, and it made her uncomfortable. She had been running. Running from heartbreak. Running from the past. Running from everything that had left her feeling alone and betrayed. But she wasn't ready to open up about any of that. She wasn't ready to trust anyone enough to talk about the mess that had been her life before she came to this town. "I'm just here to get away," she said quickly, trying to brush off his question. "It's nothing too interesting." Jack didn't push her further. Instead, he leaned back and stretched his legs out in front of him. "I get it. I've been running too. In my own way. Out here, it's just me and the ranch. No one to bother me. No one to answer to. Sometimes, that's all I need. A little peace, you know." Emma glanced over at him, curious. "You're alone? No family?" Jack's eyes softened, a flicker of something unspoken passing through his gaze. He hesitated before answering. I've got a brother, but he's been busy with his own life. And my parents, they're back east. I come out here to get away from all the noise. There was something in his voice that made Emma pause. She had always thought of cowboys as tough and unfeeling, focused only on work and never showing any vulnerability. But there was something about Jack, something in the way he spoke, something in the way he looked at her that didn't fit that image. It made her realize that maybe she didn't know as much about the world around her as she thought. Maybe there was more to people, to life, than she had ever given credit for. It sounds lonely, she said quietly. Jack shrugged, but Emma could tell that it wasn't a casual response. It can be, but sometimes it's a good kind of lonely. Gives me time to think. Emma felt the weight of his words. He had been alone for a long time, just like her. She had never expected to find someone who understood that kind of solitude, but Jack seemed to get it in a way that surprised her. They sat there in silence for a while, both lost in their own thoughts. The sun was beginning to set, casting a warm golden light over the creek. Emma could feel the tension in her chest begin to loosen, just a little, as the evening air grew cooler. She hadn't realized how much she needed a conversation like this, or how much she needed someone to listen without judgment. Finally, Jack stood up, stretching his back. I should get going, he said, looking down at her. I've got some work to do at the ranch. Emma nodded. Thanks for stopping by. It's nice to talk. Jack smiled, his eyes bright with something unspoken. Anytime. If you need someone to talk to, I'm around. Emma didn't know why, but his words made something inside her stir. She didn't want to admit it, but a part of her was beginning to look forward to seeing him again. She wasn't sure why, or what it meant, but there was something about the way Jack was around her that felt different from anyone else. Maybe it was because he didn't expect anything from her, or maybe it was because he understood the weight of silence. As Jack walked away, Emma stayed seated by the creek for a few more minutes, her mind racing. She wasn't ready to let anyone in, not yet, but there was something about Jack that made her feel like maybe, just maybe, she could. The next day, she couldn't stop thinking about their conversation. It wasn't like her to open up, to let anyone see the cracks in her armor. But Jack had made it so easy. She hadn't expected him to understand, but he had. And now, for the first time in a long time, Emma was beginning to wonder if maybe this place, this quiet little town, wasn't just about healing from the past. Maybe it was about something more. Maybe it was about finding the courage to face the future. The days began to blur together for Emma as she adjusted to her new life in the small town. She'd become accustomed to the slower pace of things, finding comfort in the quiet and the solitude. Each morning, she would take short walks through the town, stopping by the creek where she and Jack had talked. The place felt peaceful, almost like it had its own rhythm, a rhythm that Emma was beginning to understand. It gave her time to think about her life, her decisions, and what she truly wanted for the future. But it was also hard to avoid the growing realization that, despite everything she had told herself, she wasn't as fine as she had convinced herself to be. There were moments when she'd catch herself staring out the window of her room, lost in thought, and for the first time in a long while, she didn't know what she was waiting for. She thought about the people she had left behind, her friends, her ex-fiancé, the life she had worked so hard to build. The world she had once known felt like a distant memory. She'd convinced herself that she had been running towards something better. But now, sitting in the quiet of this small town, she wasn't so sure anymore. It was also impossible to ignore the way Jack had started to make her feel. He was always around, whether it was when they crossed paths at the inn, or when he brought her coffee in the mornings. Jack's easygoing nature was so different from her past. He didn't push her, never asked too many questions, but still made her feel like she mattered. The tension between them, which had been almost non-existent at first, now seemed to have grown into something more, something neither of them had expected. At times, Emma found herself wanting to confide in Jack, to talk to him about everything that had happened in her life. But she held back. She didn't want to share the hurt, the disappointment, the pain of losing someone she had once loved, and the emptiness that had come with that loss. She wasn't ready. Not yet. And besides, who was Jack to her? Just someone she'd met in a small town. Someone who didn't owe her anything, just as she didn't owe him anything. One evening, as the sun set behind the mountains, Emma decided to take another walk by the creek. The weather was warmer, and the night air had a crispness that made her feel awake and alive. She walked the familiar path, the sound of the water rushing over rocks, offering a soothing soundtrack to her thoughts. She had almost reached the spot where she and Jack had talked a few days ago, when she heard the familiar sound of hooves. She turned around, surprised to see Jack approaching on horseback, his dark hair tousled from the wind. As he got closer, he slowed down and waved, his usual easy smile on his face. Emma didn't expect to feel the flutter in her chest that she did, but there it was. Despite herself, she found herself smiling back. "Out for another walk?" Jack asked as he pulled his horse to a stop beside her. "Yeah," Emma said, trying to keep her voice casual. "I can see why," Jack replied, his gaze following the path of the creek. "The place has a way of making you slow down, doesn't it?" Emma nodded. "Yeah. It's quiet here. It's different from, well, everything else. Makes you think." Jack paused for a moment, looking at her. There was something in his expression that caught Emma off guard. It wasn't the usual teasing look he sometimes gave her, but something deeper. It was as if he was waiting for her to say something more. As if he knew there was something she was holding back. "You know," he said after a pause, "I get the feeling that you're not telling me everything. And I don't mean that in a bad way. But it's like you're carrying something, and I think you're just waiting for the right time to let it go." Emma's heart skipped a beat. He was so direct, and yet, his voice was gentle, almost as if he was trying to coax her to trust him. She immediately felt her walls go up. She had spent so much time building them, creating a life where no one could get too close, where no one could hurt her again. But Jack's words, as simple as they were, chipped away at those walls. "I don't know what you're talking about," she said, a little more sharply than she meant. She regretted the tone instantly, but it was too late to take it back. Jack seemed to notice, but he didn't back off. Instead, he gave her a small smile. "I know you don't want to talk about it, but I'm not going anywhere, Emma. I can't make you tell me, but I'm here, whenever you're ready." His words hung in the air between them, and Emma felt her chest tighten. She wanted to say something, to let him in, but she couldn't. The fear of being vulnerable, the fear of feeling exposed, held her back. It was so much easier to keep things bottled up inside, to tell herself she was fine, even when she wasn't. "You don't have to be a stranger in your own life, you know," Jack said softly, as if reading her thoughts. "It's okay to let people in. You don't have to do everything on your own." "Meine Selfer. Work solve." Emma stared at him, her mind racing. How could he understand? How could he know what it was like to carry so much pain, to feel so alone in the world? She had built a life where she didn't need anyone. And now, Jack was challenging that belief. He was making her question everything she thought she knew about herself and about what it meant to truly live. "I'm not ready," she said quietly, her voice almost a whisper. "I just need more time." Jack nodded slowly, his gaze never leaving hers. "I understand. I'm not rushing you, Emma. I just want you to know that when you're ready, I'm here." She felt something shift inside her, something small but significant. For the first time in a long time, Emma didn't feel completely alone. She didn't feel like she had to carry the weight of her past by herself. And that realization, that simple truth, scared her more than anything. She paused, searching for the right words. "I'm just not sure I know how to let someone in again." Jack's expression softened, and he gave her a small, understanding smile. You don't have to figure it all out right now. You can take it one step at a time. Two. To that. To that. To that. To that. To that. Emma nodded, her throat tight. She had no idea what the future held, but she was beginning to see that maybe, just maybe, it didn't have to be so lonely. They sat in silence for a few minutes, the soft sound of the creek providing a quiet backdrop. Emma felt the weight of her own emotions, anger, sadness, fear, start to lift, even if only for a moment. Jack was still there. And that meant something. It meant that, perhaps for the first time in a long while, Emma didn't have to walk this road by herself. As the sun began to set, casting long shadows across the land, Jack stood up. "I should get going," he said, looking down at Emma with a gentle smile. "But remember, I'm here. Whenever you're ready." Emma stood up as well, nodding. She watched him mount his horse, then watched as he rode off into the distance. There was a part of her that wanted to stop him, to say something, but she didn't. Not yet. But one thing was certain. She wasn't the same person who had arrived in this town weeks ago. And maybe, just maybe, she was ready to take the next step, whatever that might be. The days following Emma's conversation with Jack, by the creek, felt different. For the first time in a long time, she didn't feel the heavy weight of loneliness hanging over her. She had spent so much time building walls around herself, walls that she thought would protect her from further pain. But now, after spending time with Jack and hearing his kind words, Emma realized that the walls were only keeping her trapped. It wasn't easy, though. Letting go of the past, opening up, and trusting someone again was terrifying. The fear of being hurt again still lingered in the back of her mind. But she couldn't ignore the fact that Jack had been there for her in ways she hadn't expected. He hadn't pushed her or tried to fix her. He had simply listened and been present. That was something she hadn't had in a long time. Over the next few weeks, Emma found herself spending more time with Jack. He didn't push her to talk, but when she did open up, he was always there to listen. Whether it was sitting by the creek, walking through the town, or just having a cup of coffee together, Emma felt a sense of calm that she hadn't realized she was missing. She had always believed that she had to do everything on her own, that she couldn't rely on anyone else. But now, with Jack, she was starting to see that maybe she didn't have to. Maybe, just maybe, she could let someone else in. It was one late afternoon when Emma found herself walking back to the inn after a visit to the small general store. The sun was beginning to set, casting a warm glow over the land. As she walked along the dirt path, she noticed Jack's truck parked near the creek where they had talked before. She felt a flutter of nervousness in her stomach, but she didn't hesitate. She walked toward the truck, her curiosity getting the best of her. When she reached the creek, she saw Jack sitting on the tailgate of his truck, looking out at the water. He didn't see her approach, and for a moment, Emma simply stood there, watching him. There was something peaceful about the way he sat there, his posture relaxed, his face calm. He looked as though he belonged to this place, as if the land had become a part of him. She realized, with a slight pang of sadness, that she had never felt like she truly belonged anywhere. But here, in this town, with Jack, it felt like maybe she could. "Hey," she said, softly, stepping closer. Jack turned and smiled when he saw her. "Hey, Emma. Didn't see you there. You're looking better these days." Emma laughed a little, though it was soft. "I guess I am. Getting used to the pace of things here, I guess." Jack patted the spot beside him on the truck's tailgate. "Come, sit. It's nice out here. Peaceful." She walked over and sat next to him, the familiar sound of the creek flowing gently in the background. The air was cool, and the sky above was streaked with pink and orange as the sun dipped lower. For a moment, neither of them said anything. It was the kind of silence that didn't feel awkward, but rather comfortable, like two people simply enjoying each other's presence. "You know," Jack said after a while, his voice thoughtful. "I never really thought much about peace before I came out here. But there's something about this place that makes everything slow down, makes you realize what really matters." Emma nodded slowly. She had been thinking a lot about that very thing. What really mattered? She wasn't sure yet, but for the first time in a long time, she was starting to believe that it didn't have to be some grand, perfect answer. Maybe it was just the simple things, the quiet moments, the connections with others, the ability to breathe without feeling like the world was always rushing by. "I get that," Emma said quietly. "I never really knew what I was running from. I thought that leaving everything behind would fix things. But maybe it's not about running at all. Maybe it's about finding something real under." Jack turned to look at her, his expression serious but kind. "You don't have to run anymore, Emma. You don't have to carry it all alone. Whatever you're holding on to, whatever's been weighing you down, it doesn't have to stay with you. Not if you don't want it to." His words hit her harder than she expected. Emma felt a lump form in her throat as she turned her gaze toward the water. She had spent so long carrying the weight of the past that she didn't even know how to let go of it. How could she release something that had been a part of her for so long? "I don't know how to stop holding on to it," she admitted softly. "I don't know how to let go." Jack was silent for a moment. And when he spoke, his voice was gentle but firm. "You don't have to do it all at once. One step at a time. And you don't have to do it alone." Emma looked at him, her heart pounding in her chest. She hadn't realized how much she needed to hear that until now. For the first time in a long time, she felt like maybe she could finally start healing slowly, but surely. And maybe, just maybe, she could start letting people in again. "I think I'm ready," Emma said, her voice trembling just a little. "Ready to stop running. Ready to start living again." Jack smiled at her, his eyes soft with understanding. "That's all anyone can do. Just take it one day at a time. And I'm here, whenever you need me." For the first time in a long while, Emma felt a wave of relief wash over her. The weight in her chest, the fear that had held her back for so long, seemed to lift just a little. She wasn't ready to forget everything, and she wasn't ready to completely let go of the past, but maybe she didn't have to. Maybe she could start a new chapter, one where she wasn't defined by her past mistakes and heartbreak. The sun was now nearly set, and the sky above was fading into deep shades of purple and blue. Emma felt a sense of calm settle in her heart, a quiet knowing that she was exactly where she needed to be, with the right person. She didn't have all the answers, but she was starting to realize that maybe she didn't need to. She had time to figure it out. As the last light of the day flickered across the creek, Jack turned to her, a playful grin on his face. "So, how about a ride back to the inn? I promise I'll be gentle with that ankle of yours." Emma laughed, the sound light and free. "I think I can manage," she said, smiling back at him. They stood up together, and as they walked back toward the truck, Emma couldn't help but feel a new sense of hope in her heart. The road ahead was uncertain, but for the first time in a long time, she wasn't afraid to take the next step. She wasn't sure where this would lead, but she was ready for whatever came next.